There's this cliche about a watch as a treasured heirloom and the center of a very warm story between generations. The reality though is very different, and so my 1960s Omega inherited from my grandfather led me into a story of war and chaos. That story is not romantic, that story is not even pleasant, but it's true. Welcome to Caseback Watches. My name is Tim and our topic today is the 1960s Omega Constellation that I presented before here on the channel, but I think now it's a good time to present you or share with you the entire story behind that watch, because it's a very rich and very drastic and dramatic story worth telling. And as said, this watch belonged to my grandfather. It was given to my father and my father gifted it to me with a full service, and now in this year this was the most worn watch on my wrist. And so this together with the story gives me enough reason to share this story here on YouTube now. So let's start with the year 1903, where my grandfather Martin was born in Leipzig in Eastern Germany into a very conservative family, into a very conservative climate. Because back then, 1903, Germany was still a monarchy with an emperor and with certain values. So we're speaking about nationalism, we speak about obedience, which was held in high regards, and we speak about certain rules. Children are not allowed to cry, you must be strong, you must be cold. War is an essential part of history in the making. And when you study images from that time, like this one from my grandfather, I think he was between 6 and 10 years old, hard to tell, but very young. And you can see that they had already this set of values in mind, this coldness, this death stare that he developed over the decades, and that you can see in later images as well. Not only with my grandfather, you see a lot of old family images and official images when people delivered this stare to signalize that they are strong, that they are cold-blooded. And historians, by the way, they see in this form of education of very young people, one of the major reasons for World War I and II, believe it or not. Of course, not the final reason, but a strong part of it. And this was illustrated in a striking way by the Austrian filmmaker Michael Haneke in his movie The White Ribbon, definitely worth watching, where you see an old village in that time and you see a crime story, but the film is really about the education of young people in a very cold climate, which eventually led into World War I and II. And World War I broke out in 1914, and he was 11 years old back then, so obviously he wasn't affected directly by this war, but I can imagine he was affected by the climate around this war. And in the 20s he finished school. He was a rather smart boy, studied economics, and again with the need of sort of a leadership, and so he joined a fraternity of students. It was a striking fraternity, or as we say in Germany, schlagen. This means you had to fight with sabers against other members of this fraternity, and everybody was protected by an armor, but the face was unprotected. And in fact, my grandfather suffered several hits in his face with the characteristic wounds and scars then. And here you see a very old image. In the corner he is with some massive bandages around his head. And these scars, in fact, were seen as something very noble and very brave. And you definitely could spot key figures of the establishment in the 20s and in the 30s wearing these scars. Like the infamous figure you see here, which is Otto Skorzeny. And so early 20s to 30s, early education, he studied economics to his diploma, and in the 30s then he had his first job. And in 1933 the Nazi party took over power and so transformed entire Germany into a war machine. And in fact the first job of my grandfather was for Junkers Aircrafts in Dessau. So he was involved in the production of the U-88, which was basically the standard dive bomber for the Luftwaffe used in World War II. Then the early 40s came, World War II has started, and my grandfather still worked for Junkers, but he changed then to another company, which was DEA, and this stands for Deutsche Erdöl AG. You can translate this with German oil company basically. And so this company was also very important for war efforts. And this is the explanation why my grandfather wasn't drafted into the Wehrmacht. Because they had this rule: when you work for a company which was seen as critical and vital for war effort, then some people could avoid that draft. And so my grandfather worked for this DEA during the early 40s in Poland, because the truth was part of the war machine, part of the industry followed the German troops into the eastern region behind the Ostfront, because Operation Barbarossa has started. And so the family was relocated to Warsaw in 1940, the year my father was born, and they lived there and in another little town, I have to check my notes, Limanowa in Poland until 1943. And the next company he worked for produced trucks. And he was again relocated further into the east to Nadvorna, which is a city in modern Ukraine, believe it or not. Modern Ukraine, and they had a bit of land. They had pigs and a garden because it was rather difficult to maintain a family during this time. So 1944 in Ukraine. Then the Eastern Front, the Ostfront went back, pushed by the Soviets back into Germany, and so they had to relocate the family to Poland, back to Poland, and then back to Leipzig in Eastern Germany. And this was then 1944, so my father was 4 years old, and then they faced the entire brutality of the war themselves, because the war has then reached every part of Germany. And during 1943 and 1944, the city of Leipzig was the target for several bombing raids, and the family survived them by sheer luck, I would say. And with survived, I really mean survived, because they lived in the middle of these neighborhoods which were leveled after the war. And this is a very difficult part of history, because my father is completely unable to speak about that. He was 4.5 years old, so you could say it's crazy, 80 years after that, but he's still unable to speak about that. He had a little speech prepared for a little demonstration in front of really some people, only some people, and the reason was the war in Ukraine, and he wanted to share his experiences from that side of the war, and didn't go well, to tell you the truth. Didn't go well. He was unable to deliver the speech, had a bit of tears, and that was it basically. But he wrote some letters to me, and especially to my kids, to my younger daughter, for example. And one of these letters I read for you in another video. This was a video about, I think, Watch on a Walk. And I will re-edit that letter into this video so that you have a first-hand account of that period of the war. So let's hear it. My first memories are of bombings. I was 4.5 years old then. There was often a siren alarm at night when we put on clothes and went to the basement of our house. We sat on chairs and the ceiling was supported with tree trunks. When a bomb exploded on the street in front of the house, it knocked out all the window panes. The shrapnels were stuck in the beds and in the closet. Since my mother had closed the room doors in the apartment, they were all torn out by the blast. Another very large bomb hit directly behind our house. We had the impression that a wave ran through the floor of our basement and lifted us up with our chairs. Everyone was screaming. Once I was alone on my scooter on the street when the main alarm came. I ran with other people into the basement of the next house. The planes dropped their bombs in another part of town, and we were able to get out of the basement after the all clear. My mother had looked for me everywhere. After the attacks, my mother walked with me down 2 streets to her sister Ilse's house to see if she had survived the attacks. Since we had to pass so many houses that were just piles of rubble and sometimes still burning, I didn't want to go any further and cried. We then turned back. To the left of our house, one building was completely destroyed and half of the neighboring house, so that you could see into the living rooms where the furniture was still standing. After bombing raids, strips of aluminium foils sometimes trickled from the sky. The planes had dropped them to avoid being detected by radar and shot down. By mid-April, the war was over. Trucks with American soldiers drove through the streets. That was the first time I saw a black man, and I had already heard of them. And my grandfather Martin was in absence, because late in the war in 1945 they caught him and he was drafted into the Wehrmacht in the last wave, so to speak. He survived this, I would say, by sheer luck. The exact circumstances are unknown, but he survived the war, which was over then in 1945, and everything in rubble, everything in ruins, and so the family had to move into 2 little shacks in the middle of a large forest close to a town named Storkow in south of Berlin. and had to live there under very simple rules, very simple circumstances. This means they had electricity but not running water, for example. And so everything was very, very hard between 1945 and 1948. Today they say that Germany was on one level with modern Somalia back then, minus the warlords, I would say. So very hard circumstances, but after 1948 things start to normalize, and then my grandfather was in need of a job, of course. And his first job actually was guard duty for potatoes on a field with a gun, because it was still very difficult to feed your family, and people tried to rob and steal potatoes straight from the field, which was then that field, and everything else was under control of the Soviets then, and so he had to guard these potatoes. Later he had a more educated job, which brought him into a prison. He worked for the state then. In the very early 50s, worked for the state in order to recreate or reinstall a functional administration. And so this means he had a certain department, and his job was to bring that thing to a working order. And he failed so miserably that they put him into jail. The Soviets put him into jail for several months. The case was then solved after, I think, 4 months he spent into prison, and then he was found unguilty or not guilty after that. But he realized that under the Soviets, for him and his families, there wasn't so much of a future. And so the family again relocated into Western Germany, which was possible in the early 50s. We all have the imagination of the Iron Curtain in our heads. This was much later. This was in the 60s. In the early 50s, you could just go. You could just go, and they moved to Hamburg in Western Germany. And the question, of course, could be now, if he was such a bad business person that he got himself into jail. The theory from my father is that the circumstances didn't allow to reinstall the administration, and they needed somebody guilty, and so they put him into jail instead of somebody else. If this is true, I don't know. But anyways, they moved into Hamburg, Germany, or to Hamburg, Germany, and then he worked as a businessman for Edeka there in the late 50s and early 60s. And Edeka is a chain of supermarkets, and he was relatively successful because in 1960 then Edeka gave him this watch for good work, basically. And this was the moment, this was the year 1960, when the family had gained modest prosperity. They had bought their own house, still standing, still in possession of the family, and at the end a symbol for modern times, for better times for these people back then, and for the entire family as a whole. And the last question could be how I personally saw my grandfather, and to tell you the truth, he was the old man in the chair, because I was born 1976 and he was born 1903, so decades between us. And so he told me sometimes to cut my hair shorter, and that was basically it. Zero interactions. But I think parts of his education traveled through all these generations to me, basically, because my grandfather was a rather cold person. Very, very strict, and brought up with this set of values. My father, we have a very good relationship, but also very, you would say, stiff, not the super emotional guy. So this means men are rather hard. Boys don't cry, boys don't hug. And this last point is a good illustration that's interesting. In my family we had this, it was upright a law that when you are a man you cannot hug other men, because only gay people do this. And so this meant when you have reached the age of 8 years old, 8, 9, 10, then it was not longer allowed to embrace or hug your father, for example. From then on you had to use this infamous German handshake, so a very distant, cold gesture rather, compared to that Brazilian hug, for example. And these are of course the little things that are able to travel through generations, because ask me how much I like it to hug another man. Zero, I hate it. I make some exceptions for very, very close and old friends, but that's it. And now you can imagine what happens after the war in Ukraine, for example, when this simple law that you cannot hug other men can travel through generations. Then now we can imagine what is going to travel through generations after the war in Ukraine. It's breathtaking, actually. Okay, that was the story around my 1960s Omega. And do you know what? The watch could stand on its own feet. It's of course a great watch with this history behind it, but I think it's so valuable and so handsome and beautiful and powerful that you could buy such a watch even without knowing anything about the history. It really can stand for its own, but of course with a knowledge of the family history it's even better. And can we learn something from this? Historians often say that you can learn something from the past, but I'm not so sure about that because the past can be pretty chaotic. But I know for a fact that I personally learned a lot about my family and myself during the preparation for this video. So I think the only advice I can give here is to research your family history. You will learn obviously a lot about the people in your family, but you will also learn a lot about yourself. Okay, and that's it for this video. Thank you very much for your attention, and until next time.